So what we're going to do now is install our Angular application, and I've just come over to the documentation for the Angular CLI, and this is the tool that we're going to use to create our Angular application. And it's pretty simple to get started with creating an Angular application. All we need to do is install the Angular CLI, the command line interface, globally onto our computer, and this will give us access to the ng command, and we can use ng new to create our new Angular application. And then this utility gives us an option to run our application via the ng-serve command. So let's go ahead and install this first of all. So I'm just going to go back to my command line, and I'm just going to run npm install -g and then say @angular /CLI and press return. Now you do need node.js to install this because this gives us access to the npm command that we're using there. And this will probably take a few minutes the first time you install this, but I already have this installed on my computer, so all it's done is just updated a single package. Now the version of the Angular CLI is currently on 8.2.2 at the time of recording, and I'm updating this course to work with Angular version 8. Now this course was originally created for Angular version 4, and every now and again I come back in and I update it to make use of the latest version. But in all fairness, the code that we wrote in Angular version 4 is not really a great deal different from the course as it is today. Whilst Angular releases major versions every 6 to 12 months, it doesn't mean that the code changes every time. I often compare version updates of these frameworks to buying a new car. It's great to have a shiny new car, but it doesn't mean that the car you bought a year ago isn't a still working functional car that you can still drive just the same. And you certainly wouldn't take new training and learn new concepts to learn a newer version of that car that's just 1 year later. What it might have is additional features such as a new stereo. It might be slightly faster, but at the end of the day, the concepts that you learn to drive that car in the first place still apply today as they did a year ago or 2 years ago. And really, a framework such as Angular is the same thing. There will be improvements made in every major version they release, but don't be too concerned if Angular version 9 comes around and you've just learned Angular version 8. The code and the concepts are going to be very, very, very similar. And sure, there might be a few changes you need to make to the code when you do updates, but every time Angular releases a new version, you'll be able to quickly and easily find the changes that you'll need to make in your code base. And the differences between Angular 8 and Angular 6 and Angular 4 are not that significant. And we don't use any deprecated code in the course, so any code we write in Angular version 8 is still going to be valid for Angular version 9. So what we want to do now that we have the Angular CLI installed, is actually create our Angular application. So we don't want to put it inside our datingapp.api. So what we want to do is navigate up to the parent folder, which is our solution folder that contains our 2 separate projects. And what we want to do now is actually create our Angular application. So we're going to use the ng new command. Now what I'd like to call this is datingapp.spar, which would then be consistent with the naming that we've used for our API. But in JavaScript applications, a period is not allowed, so we can't use that. So what we'll need to do is change the period to a dash and say datingapp-spar. And we're not allowed to use a dash, by the way, in our .NET project, so we're not allowed consistent naming of our projects, it seems, when we're using these 2 different frameworks. But it's not a big deal. And I'm just going to call this datingapp.spar and just press return. And then this is going to ask us some questions. And first of all, it's going to ask us if we'd like to add Angular routing. Now we're going to deal with routing separately, so we're going to select no for this one. And we'll add this later on to our application. Then it's going to ask us which style sheet format would we like to use. And we get various options, but because we're using Bootstrap, we're just going to go with CSS in this case. And then it's going to go ahead and create our Angular application for us. Now this is probably going to take a minute or two. So a good opportunity to relax, go and get a cup of tea. I'm just going to pause the video whilst this goes on, and I'll come back when it's done. Okay, and once that's finished, you should see a screen something like this. You might have seen a couple of warnings as this went ahead and installed and created your application. Don't worry too much about warnings. These won't cause us any problems whatsoever. If you see errors, then that is a problem, but warnings are not an issue when we create our application. So once this has installed, if we just list the contents of our directory, now we have two separate projects. We've got our dating app -spar and our dating app .api. And I'm just going to cd into the -spar project. And if we list the contents inside here, then we can see what was created when we use the Angular CLI utility. And what we'll take a look at next is we'll take a look at our Angular project and how we can run our Angular project and how it bootstraps itself. And all of that stuff is coming up next.